and we have a form. But I do want to mention to you, I know this has been, this is hard work, and you're spending a lot of time on buses, and you working hard in long days. And I also know a lot of people, students, and I as a student had very romantic ideas about what human rights work meant. And I can tell you, and anybody who works in the area, a lot of it is just plain hard work. Ian works in an NGO in Hanoi. Very nice people, but they're up late working hard, doing tedious work, traveling out to village, all kinds of things. I'm not, so you're getting a little taste of it, I guess, to some extent. And I'm really proud of all of you, how you handled it, and the flexibility, and that's really something that's required in this kind of work. And I think you ought to all feel proud of yourselves. Yes, and again, this is the first time it's been done. And on your class schedule initially said your first 3 choices. And now you have a better idea of what some of these placements do, or at least some idea. Some people knew exactly what ICRC does, or thought they did. Other people had no idea. So we wanted to make informed choices. And this is not a full-term externship in the sense that you would spend 13 weeks out in the field. Certainly I would want, at least for the Indian students who have access to Delhi, to think about maybe doing an externship in either these placements or something else that you're familiar with. This is just a stepping stone to other things. In the U.S., we have externship programs with NGOs and government organizations that do these kind of work. They're full semester. You get academic credit for it. And in fact, Aaron and John, Aaron's from my school, went both to Laos after some training in Chiang Mai, which is in northern Thailand. No, everybody's sticking mics in my face. Oh, what is it? Oh, I'm sorry. Because I'm going to be moving over there. So, in any event, in terms of the selection process, even though Professor Maroof is gone, and I know she'll be back on the 3rd. She went to this wonderful conference in Pune on human rights. It's a conference for human rights scholars and some really amazing speakers. But in any event, she's going to be giving, I know some of you have talked to her individually, but she's going to be giving her input into this. And one of the reasons that in the beginning, it talks about themes. They tell you either the substantive topic. I'm interested in anti-trafficking. Well, I hope we all are, but that's the kind of work I want to do. But maybe your focus is, we went to the Indian Institute, and there's some people making film. That's how they're approaching it. So there may be a particular type of work within that field that you like to do. Some of you went to an NGO yesterday. They go out into the field and do a different kind of work. So there's a think tank, all kinds of different possibilities. So, and that fit some of the placements handle even the same human rights issue, but from a different angle, which is good. So if you can talk about those kinds of things. And then here is a list of all the 7 possibilities of the field placements. Instead of marking 3, mark each one 1 through 7. Here's my first choice, my second, all through 7. And I know you didn't get to visit the National Commission for the Protection of the Child, That would have been another 2-hour bus ride. And what we were, it's a very good placement. It's something Dr. Menon suggested, but their work is similar to the Delhi State Commission for the Protection of the Child. So it's focused on child rights, but in a similar way as the Delhi State Commission. So instead of, I thought that asking you to get these in by midday was not enough time to really, even though you've seen all these things, to give enough thought to it. So if by first thing in the morning, 7 a.m. tomorrow, so when you come back, it's a long day again, and so you're not doing it on the bus and just, I mean, you're not picking your job for the rest of your life. We're talking about 2 6-hour days, and it's just more of an observation. And then also what will fit into for the U.S. students, you have a different kind of research project because you're taking it for academic credit. And I'll ask Professor Prasad to talk about what the expectations are for the Indian students in terms of a research project. But the U.S. students, I've given you at least the initial idea, and we can have further conversations if you have questions, but we don't have to do that now. So that's the format. So by tomorrow morning, on the last revised schedule, it indicated that on the 30th, that after dinner, at 8 o'clock, after you start departing for a rural area in Haryana, which I really want you to see, at least even just to see how 70% of the Indian population lives in rural areas. So as Dr. Menon said, Delhi is not India. And just to get a little taste of it. And, so keep your eyes open, look out the windows, and we'll be working with an NGO that worked with the clinical law program at Jindal Global School, and the school I worked in Pune did some rural legal literacy campaigns out in the villages on issues of family law, property rights, things that come up. So what we've decided is that on the 31st, I'm not going to ask anyone to come to a class because you may have made other plans, and I don't think that's fair to switch that. But the faculty will be meeting on the morning of the 31st to go over it and get Professor Marouf's input. Because my feeling, as I told a lot of people, I don't grade exams when I'm really tired because I don't think it's fair to students, and we don't want to consider your placements. You put a lot of time and effort into just coming, getting here for one thing, and so we want to be very thoughtful in doing that. So on the morning of the 31st, we're going to sit down and go through your sheets, and then let you know. I mean, some of you will be around, and then we'll send it out by email, hard copy, and then with some detailed email instructions about Monday morning on the 4th. And if you're away, if you can at least check email once. If not, if you're here on the 31st, we'll be around. So if you're not, then you can have. I just think that's fair to you and to us, so we are considerate of your preferences and can really weigh it, and also get. I mean, if you look at on the 30th, the idea of us having breakfast at 6, and then the three of the faculty are here, and then Professor Marouf coming in by phone, talking about all of you. I just don't think we can do justice to your. We're about justice, so that's. Any questions about this process? Yes.
So the times are changing for the 30th.
Sorry?
The times of everything was
Yeah,
changed
tomorrow,
to 30.
tomorrow we are leaving by bus on morning 8 o'clock sharp. So by the time you bring and hand over to us tomorrow morning.
So not 7 for departing. Departing at 8.
Depart at 7.
We are
Yeah.
departing 7, no. We are departing at 8.
That's,
So
okay, I'm glad you raised that question because.
7 is too much, too early.
Well,
Nobody's-
okay.
So
If there's
because
any change, I'll let you know. I've just been
it-
getting different messages from different
It's
people.
basically, tomorrow we are leaving exactly sharp 8 o'clock. Then we'll reach 9 o'clock in Gurgaon. From 9 o'clock, those people will be joining us to take to the place, which takes another an hour. So by 10, hopefully we will be reaching the place. So at least 2 hours we will be spending talking to them, how they are doing, and they said they are inviting the people who are already trained by them from the village.
So the breakfast will be at 7?
7. Breakfast
Okay.
would be between 7 to 8. I
All
already
right. This
told
was
them
based
before.
on some input from the Global Jindal people about the time it takes to get there. And you know, with Delhi traffic, it's hard to predict. So you get to sleep in to another hour.
Okay, so 8 we will be leaving, and by 10 we will reach, and we will see their place, and the lunch also provided by them there only. And then after the lunch we will go to UNHRC, and from UNHRC we will be coming back.
There will not be a lecture, and I'm so sorry, I'm sure you're really crushed, on legal aid and access to justice in the classroom, because
It will be too
the
tired.
day, it's just too full. There may be some discussion at lunch or on the bus about these issues.
Yeah,
You
let
have
us- Let
materials,
us try it on the bus. We'll
Well-
have some kind of a discussion in the bus.
and there are materials in your course packet if you have an interest, because you're gonna be seeing a legal aid center. And I'll make some revisions based on what I just talked about. And I'm glad you raised that, because I was told something very differently about breakfast.
And then the selection and orientation is going to be changed to the next day, right?
Well, the selection will, there'll be nothing that you'll have to come to. The faculty, you'll get your sheets into us, and we will meet as faculty without students on the morning of the 31st. And then we'll email and distribute the decision with some instructions at that point. So if you've already had plans to go somewhere, keep them.
So the field visit is the last thing tomorrow.
Yeah, field trip. UNHRC is the last.
No, dinner.
Yeah.
Do you know what part of town the UNHCR
Okay, thank you.
is located in? Is it out?
UNHCR, no, it is in the city, in Delhi.
Okay, so we could leave if
You
we
can,
wanted to
if you
go
want,
out.
you can go out from Delhi, you can leave, yes. Yes, that's true.
The same today.
I think, yeah.
No, today we are going to NLU for the dinner.
Oh,
I think today's program you know. So afternoon we are leaving to Tihar jail to see. After Tihar jail, straight away we are going to National Law University, Delhi.
Check the email.
You need to be wired.
And to move it,
Wait, yeah, that's
encourage. Young man, can you please have a seat? Or leave the classroom. In the U.S., sometimes law professors, at least when I went to law school, it was common to humiliate students publicly, which is, hopefully that's not as bad as it used to be, but I can tell you, the law school I went to, it was brutal. If you were not prepared, then out. So, I'm not going to do that to you. I would say the primary focus of my human rights work, both as a law student and in the years since then, and it's been many years, and I know it's hard to imagine given this baby face, but a lot of the focus of my work has been in the area of prison conditions, both in the U.S. and internationally. As a lawyer, advocate, you might call, I worked on cases that lasted 20 to 30 years, which are more years than probably most of you have been alive. And that kind of litigation is called, in the U.S., class actions. And it's a case on behalf of all the prisoners, and one case was all the prisoners in the whole country. One case was women in one prison. It's against the government with regard to the conditions, and there were different issues in different cases. And then in my scholarship, an article a very brilliant article that I wrote, that's in the materials, it focuses on the incorporation of international human rights into U.S. domestic law, but I use the example of women in prison as a kind of a case study, because I want to make it come alive. And that's a little bit rare for, not many people read law review articles anymore, and I'm not sure that judges used to read them a lot more, and now they've become a little esoteric. So I wanted to bring it to a realistic problem and address that problem, and then talk about the legal doctrine that applied. 2 years ago, one of my very best friends for many years is Dr. Ved Kumari, who's on the law faculty at Delhi University. She has taken leave and is the dean or the director of the Judicial College in Delhi, and then she'll return. She's studied and trained all over the world. We've done workshops in Russia, in Federation of Georgia, in Argentina, in Poland, in India, together. A lot of her focus is on gender issues, and on juvenile rights. And there's an article that she wrote that's in your materials, but there's also a textbook that she has written on, and it's one of the few textbooks in India on juvenile rights. And if you are interested in that area, it's an excellent book. She came to my school and talked about it. I came to her school, and we just had this exchange, and we're very close. And she, because of her duties as the director of the Judicial College, it was my hope to include her in this faculty, and I think in subsequent years that'll be true. So we were stuck with Prasad. Okay. I didn't want to try to cover in less than an hour all the issues of prison conditions internationally in India and in the U.S. That's impossible. She and I, in this organization called GAGE, which we've talked about a little bit, Global Alliance for Justice Education. All of you can join. You don't have to be a law professor, and it's free. And they have a website, and it's very easy to get on. We have conferences every 2 years, and the next one is in Spain. Because you would think Western Europe would be at the cutting edge of progressive legal education. Actually, Germany and France have been the most resistant. India and U.S. and even other developing countries have come further along than countries that have tremendous resources. And so we're working on it. So we're going to Spain, and then we're going to move up the continent until they get it right. I'm going to focus just on this particular human rights issue of women in prisons. And it's becoming more and more of an issue because there are more and more women in prisons around the world, particularly in the U.S. Those numbers may not sound tremendously great, but who else besides the woman is affected? When they children, and is that different than for a man? I can tell you in the U.S., and we'll go through this, over 90% of the women were the custodial parent of the child before they went into prison. For the men, it's less than 40%, which means when the woman goes into the prison, the child now does not have a parent. And if you can find the grandmother or somebody in the family to care for the child, that's great. But that's not always an option, or they don't have the legal means to, in the U.S. for instance, or in the Russian Federation, to do the paperwork because they don't have access to the paperwork. And that's where law students can do some work. And that's the primary concern in my experience in the U.S. and these other countries, I can speak for the whole world, is what about my children? And how do I keep in contact with them? And how many of you feel that children should not have anything to do with their mother if their mother is in prison? In the U.S., that's a common belief, that the mother is a bad influence. But the psychological studies have all talked about the need to continue a tie to the parent, whether the child is with the mother in the prison or not. And children often the separation trauma for a young child is worse than being put in what you might think is a nicer home. And that's some public education that we need to go through in these matters. I'm going to just give you some international figures on, of course, and I'll show you the figures for men and women, and this is in the PowerPoint materials, and I'm not going to go through in detail, but you can get some idea of the numbers. And look at the discrepancy in terms of the population. The U.S. has 183,000 as of the state. That's the next country is China. It's not even close in the numbers. And then look at other countries. We'll get both to the U.S. and to the India side. And the reason I can talk about India is because I'm going to use the words of Dr. Kumari, because we did a presentation together on women in prisons in Manila at the Gage conference. And this comes from the PowerPoint slide that we used in our presentation. So we will cover India, and don't think it's my words. It comes from an Indian scholar, human rights scholar, who's also worked in the field all around the world. This again is there's been a significant increase in the last 30 years in the number of women who are going to prison, not just in the U.S., but worldwide. Look in the U.S., 757% increase. And that's in a fairly small, and even in the country of New Zealand, who you may think doesn't have a lot of crime, and relative to the U.S., that's probably true, but there's still a significant increase, and we'll talk about why that's happened. Even in Japan, which prides itself in being a safe society, 44% increase, a huge jump. What we have found worldwide is that women are usually in prison for either drug-related offenses, typically possession. When they are involved in sales, it's usually at the behest of someone else who's having them do the sales, or they're selling to get money for their own addiction. And there's a change going on in the world about whether drug addiction with illegal drugs is more of a disease than a criminal offense. And part of the reason, at least in my home state, and it really throughout the U.S., what's generating is that we have so many prisoners, it's costing too much money. In my home state, we spend more on locking people up than we do on education. And it's partly because we'll talk about the war on drugs. So, and the petty nonviolent property crimes, just minor theft, those kinds of things, they're often related to the drug problem. They're stealing so they can buy drugs. So it's not unrelated. And relative to men, violent crime is very, very low with women prisoners compared to men. Most come from socially disadvantaged communities. That may not be a big surprise, but then the question is for human rights, why is that? Are they worse people who, or is there a focus on law enforcement on one group versus another? And we'll talk about some racial disparities and why that is. And you have to come to your own conclusion. And there's, not just in my country where there's a huge disproportionate number of prisoners are of African American relative to about 10% of the population, well, almost half of the prison population is African American. Is that why is that? You have to decide. But it's been devastating to many communities. Where I went to law school in New York, in the surrounding community, I would walk around and I would see no young black males. And the reason is that for the most part is that they're either in prison or dead because of drugs, the drug culture. And it's very sad. And what does that do to that community and its ability to better itself? Mothers, big issue with women prisoners. Obviously, men are not mothers. There may be some exceptions, but this is a special need that I mentioned before about being and this isn't just in the U.S. This is internationally. This is a matter. When I came to India and did my Fulbright, part of my research was to go to different prisons in India and see the conditions that women prisoners were kept under, what was the relationship to their child, how was that maintained, and I did that in other countries and in my own, and we'll talk about that. But it's a problem worldwide. And access to the courts. Again, the men want access to the courts because on my criminal case, I want to appeal my conviction. I'm generalizing. Of course, some men care about their parents, about their children, but the primary, when we ask people to list their primary legal need among the women is family law matters. How can I get the paperwork to place my child with my mother so the child can be placed in school and get certain benefits and things like that? Otherwise, the child will go to the state and be placed with a stranger who's getting paid. And there's unfortunately in many countries in that situation, children are victimized in that situation. So it's not necessarily, this idea that it's going to solve everything, it certainly isn't true. This is something, and we'll talk about it later, where law students can do something. And one of the problems that you'll get will address that, because it's going to be different in different institutions, in different countries, different states. One significant difference that we found worldwide, not just between India and the US, but worldwide, is that women who came into prison had a very large number of them, over 80% in some cases, had been victims of sexual abuse at some time in their life. And what does that mean for the conditions of prison? Any ideas? Who's doing, they're searched all the time, hand searched. Sometimes what we call strip search to see if there's any contraband. How does that impact, and relative to men, there's a much lower percentage, under 10%, who have been victims of sexual abuse. Blake?
Wouldn't they undergo re-victimization?
What's that?
Wouldn't they undergo re-victimization?
Well, why don't you explain what that term means?
So as far as the re-victimization, they go back, it's almost as if they experienced the rape that they previously experienced again by being strip searched or even patted down, you know.
And often they've been victimized by someone in their own family or somebody who is in a position of authority. Somebody might have heard about the abuse of young boys by priests in church, school teachers, it could be an uncle. It's usually someone they know who's in a position of power. If you're in prison, the prison guard is in a position of power. So it recreates what Blake was talking about. Somebody had a hand up over here?
No, he just...
Okay. Great minds think alike. You can see in the US and UK, 85% have been came in with victims. And that may also have something to do with what? Maybe why they're taking drugs. A lot of people take drugs to self-medicate. They have mental health issues. They don't go to a psychiatrist. They drink or they use drugs to kind of keep the pain down. Much higher levels of depression, self-mutilation, hurting themselves, and suicide than males. May again be related to prior abuse or separation from their children. I can tell you in my experience with individual women prisoners, when there is a decision by a court that says you can never have contact with your child again, the woman who may be working very hard to do well so she can get out to see her children and to better her life, gives up. Because that's what's the most important to her. And that doesn't seem to be the case generally with men. Some of my best friends are men. I'm not. It's a dramatic difference. This is just what I thought was an appropriate quote from the head of the prison system, basically in UK, about the issue of how we've been talking about equality. What does that mean in the context of prisons? Do we treat men and women the same? Do we treat prisoners? Do we treat male and female guards the same? Do they have different needs? If we treat everyone equal, I can tell you, in one lawsuit I had, we were fighting for the right of women to have what we call in the use gynecologists, doctors especially for women's medical needs, and their position, it was based on the Equal Protection Clause, and their defense, which was just shameless, was we don't give men gynecologists, so they're treated equally. So it's an issue of how do we fit that concept of human rights in the context when people really are different and have different needs and different experiences and come into the system differently. I'm going to show you some of Dr. Kumari's work. Some of it's very detailed, and that's why you can, if you're interested, you can look at some of her figures. I'm not going to go through this, but this is sort of the gender distribution between men and women, and a significant number when I went to Tahar prison a few years ago and to some other prisons, almost half the prison population are under, what's called under trial in India. In the US we would say on bail, awaiting trial, some for years and years. And finally the Indian Supreme Court said if you have served, somebody brought a PIL. What's a PIL? What does that allow someone to do? You're not a woman prisoner. Can you bring a PIL? Okay, in the US you couldn't, but here you can. And someone brought a PIL and said we have all these people who have served more time waiting for their trial than they could possibly be sentenced to if they went to trial. And so the Indian Supreme Court said if someone has reached that limit, you just have to release them. Because whether you're under trial or under sentence, you're still being deprived of your personal liberties. I'm just passing through that because if you have an interest, you can get into that. The U.S. As of this year, it's almost 2.5 million people men and women are incarcerated, locked up. And that, we have a population of approximately 300 million people. That's a lot. No country is close to that. We used to run neck and neck with the former Soviet Union and the South African government under apartheid. And guess why that was true? Why would that be true during apartheid in South Africa? The jails, I can tell you, because I was there, the prisons were full of black men who were involved in the anti-apartheid. Well, Nelson Mandela, who you all know, who's now the president, spent 28 years in prison for treason for speaking out and saying that people, Africans from this very country had some rights vis-a-vis the colonial powers, and 20 years is a long time, and other people serve longer. Okay, you can see the percentage of people, of women, 1 out of 100 men. That would mean if you, I mean, sometimes I'll be in a room of an audience of 100. I mean, just think of different contexts where you go to a sports event. 1 out of every 100 people are locked up. That's a lot.
For African Americans, though, isn't it like 2 and 5?
Yeah, we'll get to that. And for females, a much higher percentage. There's been a tremendous increase, and it's primarily under drug offenses. And for the U.S. students, why might that be? What has happened in the last 20 years? We had this war. What was that war?
Well, it's the war on drugs, but it actually goes back to Nixon.
All right.
The first declaration, but then, I mean, the major spike from like post-95 on, well, crack came into the scene in the mid-late 80s, which really upped the...
It was easy for politicians to get elected if they were tough on crime. And it's easy to pass a law, and drugs have devastated some communities. But the response was not to provide treatment. It was to lock people up, give mandatory sentences, long mandatory sentences for people who, for simple use. And I'm not saying that it's okay. I'm just saying to serve that significant amount of time. There are 2 types of cocaine. All of you know what cocaine is? There's powder cocaine, and then what's called crack cocaine. And the use is different, but in the federal sentencing laws, it's still the same kind of, it's still cocaine. And under the federal sentencing laws, for the same amount of crack cocaine, which is more prevalent in the African American community, you serve almost between 10 and 50 times more time for the same amount for possession versus powder cocaine. And I was on a panel at the University of Maryland talking about sentencing issues. And the question from the audience came up, how did they come up with that number? 100 to 1, 50 to 1 with crack cocaine. And a man on the panel who works for an NGO trying to change this said, because of me. He was a legislative aide in the U.S., in the Parliament, in our Congress, who picked that out of the air. It was not based on research or anything else. And then his boss, who was a senator, decided, that sounds good, let's put that in the law. That's how thoughtless it is. And how many people have done many, many, many more years because of that foolishness. And what we could say, let's just change the law back to what they were. In a political environment, why might that be difficult? Because it takes the legislators to change the law. The judges, because of mandatory sentencing for possession of drugs, the judges has no discretion. I have to give you 10 years.